everybody. It is so good to have you here with us. So you get a window into the way we roll here at Black Women Unmuted. Tonight, I am quite happy and thrilled to be having a conversation with two of my sister friends who go back with me to the White House days a generation ago. Ooh, ladies, can you believe it's been a generation ago? I call them the Kias. We have with us Kia Baskerville, who at the time of our camaraderie was a producer at the White House for CBS News, and Kia Johnson, who at the time of our camaraderie was a producer for Reuters Television at the White House and remains a producer for Reuters Television. Am I still getting that right?
Yeah, it's fine. Yes.
Okay, good. All of us were in motion on that fateful day, September 11th, 2001. So we thought it would be a good idea for Black Women Unmuted to take some of these Black women journalists who were behind the scenes that fateful day and take them off mute. Let us tell the stories of what we were doing and experiencing and thinking on that day. Kia B and I were together that day. So, Kia Johnson, I'd like to start with you on the ground here in Washington, D.C., and then we'll go to Kia B to tell the story of how that day began for you.
On that day, and many of you remember, it was a beautiful day. It was not a cloud on the sky here in Washington. I was on my way to work. I had two small children that time, and my daughter, who was 3, she was sitting on the floor like we women do. I was combing her hair. I was putting little braids in her hair, watching the Today Show when I saw what happened. And the news person in me put it into another gear. I'm like, oh my gosh, we gotta get through this. And I had to mobilize to get my 3-year-old and my 1-year-old to childcare to get downtown. And it's kind of a blur because I just remember doing things in rapid speed to get downtown. And no one called me, but you just knew you had to get downtown as quickly as possible. And at that time, I have to tell you, I was the only one driving into the city, into downtown Washington. It was complete gridlock for everyone getting out of town. But I had smooth sailing right downtown. And the closer I got to the epicenter of, the White House and everything in the Federal Center, I was encountering tanks and armed military on each corner. I remember getting to 14th and K and being surrounded by it looked like it could have been a war scene with a wall of armed soldiers and tanks on the corner at 14th and K. And I'm like, oh my gosh, am I doing the right thing by heading into danger? I don't think anyone would have really blamed me if I would have said I wanted to stay home with my 3-year-old and 1-year-old and not go into that, in for that day. But I think most journalists, we put it into a second gear and we kind of thrive on the energy of being in the action. Of course, I didn't know exactly what was happening or the complexity or the background, but you just knew instinctively that you had to get there and be a part of it.
Now, I think it's fascinating. Let me back this up a little bit. If I'm understanding you correctly, you didn't get a call at all from your desk saying hustle to the White House or come on in here, we all hands on deck. You did not get a call like that. Your instincts just said, go to work.
I was due to be in later that day. So I was scheduled to work, I think either 1 o'clock, I think I might've been on the night shift, but I went in early that day because I knew that we needed all hands on deck because everyone was too busy to call. No one's gonna call. But I went in and they were like, oh my gosh, Kia, we're so happy that you're here. So that was just the beginning of a long, I want to say 14-hour day. And it's, what we went through covering the news is nothing in comparison to what the people on the ground and, those, the people who rescued the firefighters and the first responders and, the people on the Fight So Fateful Day. So, I mean, I'm not looking for sympathy, but it was just the fact that we were called to tell the story, to share the story with the world on that day, because we knew it was very important.
It's interesting, the journalistic instincts that kick in when you're not asked to do something. And I got to tell you, it rang familiar with me, and Kia B, I'm sure it probably rang familiar with you as well when we heard Kia say, nobody called me or asked me to come. I simply rose to the occasion. Do you ever feel, and I'll start with you on this, Kia B, do you ever feel that no one tends to think of us for these type of roles? I mean, we'll get further down the road on that in a minute, but that to what extent did you feel that it didn't occur to folks that someone like you or us would be doing this particular story at this level?
I didn't think about what anybody was thinking. I was too busy doing my job and in shock and not interested in people thinking like, oh, I'm just a producer. I happen to be working one of the biggest stories in history. It wasn't anything like that. I mean, you just, I think you mentioned it before, or Kia mentioned it, you get in this mode. And I got to tell you, I was in that mode for at least that next year. So, as a Black woman, I'm grateful that I was there and I did the job to the best of my abilities, and the information was given to the world. I mean, I was working as the network travel pool producer for, not only CBS News, but ABC, CNN, Fox, and NBC, and all their affiliates. So, when you're in a situation like that, it's tunnel vision. And I don't think about the color of my skin. I didn't think about, how smart I was. I've never been a soldier, but I can imagine it was very similar to, you've got to complete the mission. And that's what that day, really was about for me.
Now, if you don't mind, let's back it up to, say, I don't know, September 10th, and this particular trip that President George W. Bush was on in Florida, how it was perceived among us, and just the vibe of that particular travel. You and I were together on that same little trip that wasn't exactly a thrill a minute type trip. So just paint a picture for those who weren't around for what it was like that day to be traveling, what it was like just before that day and going into that day, what it was like traveling with the president.
I think I was working over the weekend, and I remember my deputy bureau chief rushing to my desk and asking, hey, how fast can you get to Andrews Air Force Base? And I'm just like, immediately, I've always been a plane buff. So I'm like, wait, what? what do you need? How fast? I live here and it's on the way to Andrews. What do you need? And he's like, we are going to take John Roberts, who was the White House correspondent at the time, chief White House correspondent at the time, off the trip to cover next week we're going to cover, it was a big budget bill in Congress. And he's like, this is your opportunity. You want to go and be travel pool that day. And the travel pool consists of course, Miss Kia Johnson. And well, Kia was at the White House that day, but I meant to say Miss Sonia Ross was on the plane sitting right next to me. And it was a wild time because I just remember I was still kind of a cub. I'd only been on Air Force One other time. But this is the reason why the networks collectively work together to be there with the president of the United States, just the most important person in the world, arguably, while they travel. It's a protective pool, and we have to be there. History has shown us that agreement between the government and journalists was very much needed. So I got to Andrews Air Force Base, was thrilled. It wasn't my first ride on Air Force One, but it was my first ride with George W. Bush. We had a couple of stops, the 2 previous days or whatever, but nothing prepares you for 9/11.
I gotta tell you, because I was a little bit of an old lady in the room. I had been on the beat at that point 6 years and had done a ton of protective pools, many of them with you, Kia J, and that particular trip, as I recall, sort of devolved into a lot of the star wattage reporters said, "Oh no, don't worry about that trip. It's a nothing trip. It's not going in. Big deal trip. The big deal is coming next week or whatever." So the name brand journalist, so to speak, kind of begged off that trip. It was a Sunday to Tuesday slog to Florida and back. The president was considered to be just visiting his brother and not doing much of anything. And the body watch mode definitely took over. It is, let's just, put folks in to be body watch. And I had just come off the road right before that trip. I had done whatever trip was prior. I don't even really remember it now. So it wasn't even my turn to travel, but I was told, no, you got to go on this one because we need so-and-so on a bigger trip. So it was interesting to see that your first experience with President Bush happened under similar circumstances that, hey, at the last minute, you go on this trip. Yeah. Kia J, question for you. Now that you've made your way in to DC, had the Pentagon already been struck when you got started on your day? And what type of duties were you performing? Were you more like in a triage type situation? Were you at the White House? Give us a glimpse of your day.
I was not scheduled to be at the White House. It was not my turn. So I was actually in the office kind of handling or being a part of the incoming feeds and editing and getting the material back out, managing live signals, getting them back out. Just a constant churn of distributing the breaking news to our global TV clients. And the Pentagon had just been hit. And of course, there was concern. There was, all kinds of random theories. Oh, there's another plane. There's a lot of misinformation. And of course, my colleagues, my friends were on the scene, and you could feel the smoke. You can kind of see the smoke from downtown, from the Pentagon. And they pretty much walked there because I don't recall that there was any transportation. So anyone who went, they were kind of on the bridge covering, and I was managing those feeds. And then, of course, the Pennsylvania plane went down, and it was just like, at that point, it was just like, the floor had come out, the bottom fell out, and everyone was just like, oh my gosh, both of the towers and then Pennsylvania and the Pentagon. And then a little bit later, the tower crumbled in New York, and we were watching everything live, and it was catastrophic. And at that point, I have to tell you that although I realized that everything was real, part of the way that I processed it and dealt with it and continued to do my job was I somehow factored it as being a movie scene, that it was not, although I knew it was real, I put it in another gear that made it seem like it was not, in order for me to get through. Like it was kind of like, I don't want to minimize or trivialize what was happening, but I tried to make it seem like it wasn't actually what I was seeing, because it was just so damaging. Right. And I remember after working that very long day, coming home mentally and physically drained and trying to get some sleep. And those of us who lived in the city, in Washington, D.C., will recall that the military fighter jets were circling around our houses all night on a loop. So you could kind of hear the airplanes coming over doing surveillance around the city, which meant that you never actually could escape, what was
Right.
happening. At the end of the long day, after everything that we'd seen, none of us got any sleep because of the constant reminder of what we had seen with the military presence flying over our house literally every 5 minutes. And I don't remember sleeping that entire week and going back in day after day for more of the trauma and covering the news. And I think that was the first story that I remember having thought about taking care of your mental health while covering the news. And it was, I think that everybody in this industry really had to just like take some time for self-care and separate yourself from the news and reflect on yourself. And I know that sounds a little bit selfish, but and compared to what people went through that, unfortunately lost their loved ones, it was just so tragic. And just, I felt each one of those people. I felt them in the stories that I was doing. I was grieving with them. We were all grieving. We were grieving as a country. And to see a lot of the images that most people didn't see that day on the pool feeds, it was traumatic. It really was traumatic. And having to decide what we should put out and what we shouldn't, what was too graphic and what wasn't. It was a lot. It was really a lot. And I just remember just very vividly just being mentally and physically just exhausted.
I totally understand what you mean about having to pause for some self-care, mental health care. It definitely was a factor. I mean, I think a lot of people saw this rather well-known photo of me on Air Force One reacting to footage of the towers collapsing. I call it the bad hair day that lives in perpetuity, because I had natural hair, was sticking up. I was wearing headphones, and so I was waving at people like, hello. And at the same time, I'm shocked and mortified by the unflinching video coming out of New York and what was happening at the World Trade Center, and actual, not just the towers collapsing, but seeing the people either jumping or falling from the upper floors. And it was mortifying. And I said, there is absolutely no way I can unplug emotionally on this to do my job. I didn't want to unplug emotionally. I thought it was really the best way to protect myself. And we unplug emotionally so much in this field, in what we do. If we and dealing with the issues that come up garden variety every day, especially being a woman of color, and in this field that's very testosterone laden and pushy. So I didn't want to unplug my feelings, disconnect or compartmentalize them. I thought my feelings were as central to the reporting as the actual events on the ground. And I'd like to know from you ladies what you feel, if that was consistent with where you were at that time as well.
I'm a part of history in a way I never wanted to be. I never expected I would be, but also am so honored and learned so much about humanity from a very good perspective, but also an evil perspective. Mm-hmm. And it's daunting. And you were talking about people jumping from the towers. It's be burned alive or, jump out the window to your death. And either way, they're terrible options. And it's unimaginable for any human to be put in that situation. And mm-hmm. there are 2 to 3 sounds that I have since been reminded of of that day. And I have nightmares about them constantly. It won't stop. And that is people jumping out the windows to their death and hitting cars. They're landing on cars. It is the most excruciating sound that I remember from watching news reports. It's just, there's that, there's reports that I saw that firefighters who had run into the building and were around that building. And I didn't know this until today, that each fireman has an alarm on their body that when the oxygen level gets low and they're in desperate need of help and they're on their way to perishing, if not perished. And all you could hear at one point in New York City, I recall someone describing it, there were these alarms and they keep going off one by one by one when there was sounds in the city. And, it's our responsibility to continue to tell this story, and I will to the day that I die. And that's not because I want any particular accolades or anything like that. This is the most important time in my journalistic career ever. And I don't plan on going back into journalism, but we have to continue to tell the story because we are eyewitnesses to, it goes beyond a description of history. It's the most important event in our lifetimes. And we cannot forget, and we're not going to allow people to forget, and we are not going to allow people to twist the story. I mean, there are still people out there who believe that 9/11 never happened, despite the proof. I mean, it's like facts don't matter anymore. But you are seeing visual facts for the last 20 years. You've seen remnants of the planes and the buildings. And you mean to tell me that there are still people out here who don't believe us as journalists? Oh, it's fake news. I got another thing for you. Walk in our shoes, that day. You try and do what we did that day. And that's just incenses me to no end. So we must keep telling the story.
Yeah, I think often about just I hadn't really thought about it in this context since 9/11, and that is just the tenuous nature of our democracy and what it hinges upon and what can make it turn on a dime. We hadn't had to actually think about those things, and I'm kind of grateful that in the time that 9/11 happened, the security of our nation was being challenged in a way and threatened in a way it had never been threatened on our soil on this side of the continent. And we now know, looking back through the prism of hindsight, that there were active discussions about keeping the president out of Washington for his safety and him insisting, no, I must go back. And I was feeling very pressured to perform in a way that was meritorious and admirable. I don't know if I'm coming across very articulate here or not, but in a moment in time where we as journalists were called to do something that is anticipated for generations, yet had never been actually done until that moment, as in evacuating a president for his safety, what they called that nuclear bunker pool, about a government an executive branch of the government that operates outside of where it normally is physically. Legislative branch, judicial branch, same thing. We were dealing with something in real time that had only been imagined. And I often wonder to what extent, and I'd like to know from you ladies what you think history will say. We got 20 years of history now, but would history be kind to our generation of journalists for what we did to perform on 9/11, 2001?
We did our jobs, and we did our jobs to the best of our abilities. And we all were in situations and worked for companies where we had to perform at the highest levels. And it wasn't just 9/11, but particularly on 9/11. You know, we had to deliver. I wasn't delivering just for CBS News. I was delivering for 5 networks and their affiliates. I was answering and reporting to the world. And, you know, if anybody says, oh, that was way above her head, again, continue to try and walk in my shoes that day.
Exactly. Did either of you ladies have that Black family moment pop in on you over the course of the day? Because I have to tell you, I did. My sister pierced the silence of cell phone towers not working. She managed to get through on my cell phone, and I told her where I was. We were getting ready to leave Sarasota for God knows where we were going, and she says, "Where are you? Are you safe?" And I said, "Oh, of course I'm safe. I'm with the president. We're at a tarmac. We're going to be taking off in a few minutes." And she said, "Oh, we have to pray for traveling mercy." So there I am, and my sister, the minister, is like, "No, we praying for traveling mercy right now," and did that crazy church prayer before we took off. Did you have a Black family moment that popped in on you over the course of that long day?
I don't think I can remember anything quite like that, but just more real family dynamics with, you know, my kids are here, and then, they were with my aunt down the street. My aunt's niece worked at the Pentagon, and she did not know what her status was. So here I am dropping off my kids. You know, school was closed, daycare was closed. But I remember that I was dropping my aunt off, and she was on the phone trying to see if her relative made it out of the Pentagon alive. And that was harrowing. Of course, my husband worked at Reagan National Airport. Couldn't talk to him. He was stuck on the other side of the bridge all day. So it was just a chaotic time, you know, behind the news scenes, just with your, you know, the inner workings of your day, being a working mother, just trying to keep all of these ducks in a row on the periphery so that you could still focus on getting your job done. It's amazing, you know, what we do and how many balls that we have to juggle each day, just, you know, on a regular day. But on an extraordinary day, it's just, it's amazing. And never underestimate what we can do. Put us, you know, we're put to the test daily, and we keep shining, you know, like a brand new penny each time.
Now, your children were 1 and 3 at the time, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
How did you explain this situation to them?
I couldn't really, they were too, well, the 1-year-old was just too small, but the 3-year-old watched it with me on the Today Show as it happened. And it really looked like a movie scene. And I remember watching it and saying, oh my God, and kind of just getting out of the house very quickly. I didn't think really it was appropriate to talk to young kids about it because it was just too catastrophic and too, I thought it would be damaging for me to discuss it with my 3-year-old. But she was a news, she was a news, you know, she was the daughter of a news person. And I remember on a separate story, she would sit in the little grocery cart, and I remember walking through Safeway, and I was in the produce area, and there was this woman squeezing some fruit, and my daughter says to her, Chandra Levy is missing and they can't find her anywhere. And and this woman looked at me like, what kind of person are you telling her about Chandra Levy? So I realized, from an early age that she was obviously soaking up everything, and I think that was after, but Sydney had a way of listening. She didn't always understand, but she knew. But she told this woman, Chandra Levy is missing and they're looking for her and they can't find her anywhere. That was obviously after. But I just tried to keep them separated from the news because you don't know how little minds process things.
Kia B, when were you able to connect with your family? Because I know we had some serious telecommunication challenges while on the road with Bush. And also, talk about your journey. Obviously, we took part of the trip and then we split up. And I continued on with the president, and you continued with the press corps. So talk a little bit about that as well.
You were talking about we didn't know where we were going. Well, that's definitely true. I mean, once we left the elementary school in Sarasota and we were on the plane for 2 hours, I recall vividly asking, I believe it was a Secret Service agent who happened, their compartment on the plane was right in front of ours.
Right ahead of ours.
And this person was coming back and for whatever reason. And I just, I was kind of looking up and I'm looking down and I see him come by and I said, the president said on the ground that we were headed back to DC, but, we should be descending by now. And instead we seem to be flying higher and higher and higher. I'm starting to see darkness. And it's like, can you at least tell me how high we are? I mean, no one spoke with us from the White House that entire 2 hours, except for the last maybe 10 minutes.
Yeah.
But that Secret Service agent came back to me and said, ma'am, we are at 44,000 feet right now. And I'm just like, holy.
I remember vividly when he came back and shared that, and we all looked at each other like, where? Ever we're halfway to the moon. Are we ever on the side?
Yeah, it just again, I'm an aviation buff, and I'm like, I know this plane is equipped to do some things, but I don't know if we're equipped that much to be able to be a rocket and just head up to space and get lost. So, that was pretty, I mean.
It was sobering, I tell you. Yeah, it was sobering. And I felt like I knew we weren't going back to Washington. I said that because right before we boarded in Sarasota, I had managed to get through to our bureau, the AP bureau in Washington, and talked with the bureau chief and let her know, we're getting on the plane. We're supposed to be coming back there. And she said, okay, a plane has hit the Pentagon. I've got to go. So I said, there's no way on earth they're going to let the president of the United States go back to Washington if a plane hit the Pentagon too. And that too was what was in my head as I scrambled up the steps with my baggage and got to our seat. And that when we took off, did it feel to you, Kia, like we just sort of shot straight up into the air? The G-forces were amazing.
Absolutely. We, from the time that we stopped at the school to the time that we got back on the plane there in Sarasota, it was just, it was a scramble. And I remember barely even sitting down when the plane started moving. And, it's just like, it was just another, I call it a series of moments because it seemed like every other, 5 to 10 minutes, there was something new happening. And you just you can't believe that you're actually living it. You're not just living through it, you're living it at the moment. Yeah. And so everything just, it just, it's crazy. You just don't think this kind of thing happens, but you also can't make up a story like this, you know?
Yeah, or prepare for it,
Or
for that
prepare.
matter, or prepare for it.
That is correct.
Kia B, please share with folks what you did to close out your day in terms of the president's address. And Kia J, you were obviously positioned to sort of be on the receiving end of Kia B's work that day in that moment. So let's just share a little bit about that.
So once we got to our second stop, Barksdale Air Force Base, I was quickly ushered off of the base by military police to feed out the second, address to the nation that day. It turns out that everybody knew where we were going, including you, my seatmate. Or no, I'm not sure you knew actually where we were going, but you knew we weren't going back to DC. And I sat there for 2 hours thinking, yeah, we're going back to DC, until we didn't. But everybody else seemed to know we were coming to Barksdale.
I surmised it. Let me just say that. I surmised that we weren't going back.
So there were about, I can't tell you how many, easily over 30 local affiliate trucks from every network parked right outside Barksdale. So they knew definitely before I knew. But we took that tape, the president, we went to a separate room and the president made his second address of the nation to the nation. And I remember getting a call from the police officer who was sitting in his car waiting for me and my cameraman. And he said, "Hey, we gotta go now because the plane is leaving." And by that time it was like we finished feeding the tape out live. I remember very specifically that it was soap opera time, and I also remember very specifically that everything was so chaotic at that moment. I'm on 2 phone calls, people screaming in my ear, and I'm just trying to play this tape to air. And so, of course, a lot of folks saw that it was played a little early and rewinding and all of that. But that's just the nature of the business and the animal that we were dealing with. But I ended up getting back to the airbase and not boarding Air Force One. Andy Card, the chief of staff at the time, suggested that the travel pool be cut in more than half. They took 5 people. Ann Compton went in my place. Understandably, she was, an on-air
radio
reporter. Well, she was radio pool, but she was also an on-air reporter for ABC News. So in hindsight, yeah, I understand why that decision was made. And so we ended up sitting on the base. There were like some Secret Service agents and some other staffers, White House staffers, a couple other press people who stayed behind. And I just remember us all collectively like, all right, I think we're going to have to rent a van or something to get back to DC because, there's no planes flying. Well, Andy Card, who, on that trip from Florida to Louisiana, had everything lined up because we had lunch waiting for us when we were there while waiting for what inevitably was a Secretary of State's plane coming to get us because there were no other planes allowed to fly. So, there's like 10 to 12 of us or whatever on the 757. And we start landing in the evening from the south to the north. And I'm on the left side of the plane and the sun is starting to set. And I see the smolder from the Pentagon, just huge plume of smoke. And it was permanent. It was like it was never going to move again. And that image is just so vivid in my mind. We didn't have smartphones then, or I would have been,
clicking away.
Yeah. Yeah. And so to end this, I got on the ground. I finally was able to call my family, let them know I was okay. But before that, I called into work and it was like, Kia, I need you to go to the White House. And I'm like, what? Wait, what? That's my saying, I guess. I did that a lot during my journalism days.
Wait, what?
And yeah, I think that's in a Michael Moore movie or one of his films. Yeah. So uh, and my boss was like, we're pool for the president's address at 9 o'clock tonight. He's on his way back. And I'm like, wait, what? Okay. So hopped in my car, got to the White House, got to the Oval Office, and my boss at the time, our senior producer for the special events unit, was like, hey, all right. He was very intense. Like, when he's on, he's very intense. And it's like, all right, listen, you're gonna cue the president to go on air. I got to get back to the control room. And I'm like, wait, what? It was literally a series. That was like the entire day basically. But, and the next thing I know, Scott Sforza, who was, I can't remember what his title was, director of TV and events or something like that. Important dude. I had never met him before, but he comes up to me and he's like, all right, Kia, great. Nice to meet you. So is this going to be a standard 2-minute countdown? And I just looked at him like, I truly in my head, I had no idea what I was thinking. What they were thinking, I had no idea what I was about to do. And I'm like, college doesn't prepare you quite for this. I didn't realize I'd end up being the floor manager and counting him down. It was just last minute. And I looked at him and I said, you know what, Scott, I just got here. I'm going to talk to my boss about it, and I'll confirm that soon. But I think 2 minutes is correct. I'll never forget. I went to my boss, who was still there in the Oval Office at the time. I'm like, you got to tell me what I'm doing right now, because now is not the time for me to screw anything up. Not at the end of this incredible day, as a journalist and as a producer. I got to get this right. And so we went through it. Next thing I know, everything was, it was so different 30 minutes prior. But when we were in there setting up and the president walked in to practice his speech, Scott told us, like, listen, he's going to come in here. He's going to run through this a couple of times. Nobody talk, nothing until the countdown. And I'm just like, I just took a breath, and I took a very deep breath, and I just said, this has got to be done, and it's got to be done right. And even though it was just a 2-minute countdown, it was the most important 2-minute countdown of my life. And we got on air very smoothly. And afterwards, everything was super quiet. No one moved. He finished his speech and he was so somber and stoic. I'm remembering it like I was there today. And he looks up at me and I look at him and I give him a nod, as if to just say everything's going to be okay. And he says, good job today. That was my day. I went home and I don't remember the first night of sleep, at least in a week after that.
I just wanted to say that it's incredible to be a part of this group of amazing Black women who have been behind the scenes working, just the dedication, the professionalism, just the class that we performed our responsibilities that day. Without question and without fanfare, just doing our jobs to the best of our abilities. And in uncharted territory, there's no, like Kia said, there's no guidebook, there's no playbook. This is kind of flying by the seat of your pants. And all of us came through just doing a great job. And I'm proud to be in the company of both of you.
Oh, that's really sweet of you. I'm proud to be in your company as well. Always. It was always a joy being at work with the Kias. I tell you, just to be women in that setting. I don't know that people truly understand the extent to which American politics grinds on testosterone. and and it's not like a constant thing where you're constantly reminded that you're a girl, but there are these moments where you have to elbow in to get yours, and you have to wait. You have to pick your battles. Like for example, at the school in Sarasota that day, I was in the pool in the room, the classroom where the president came in for the reading drill with the students. And we all knew we had to shout a question. And I'm thinking, and Kia B, you probably thought this too. How am I going to shout down these men with these deep voices and their voices carry? Do I compete to get my question in this setting? And luckily, Andy Card walked through the side door, whispered to the president. The president's face drained of color. It sort of gave us the answer to the question we all had. But I said, I'm going to have to shout, but I don't know that my question will be heard. And you go in to give it your old college try. And you know what I mean? The moments where you have to fight and elbow your way in this male driven world. So it was always so good to see you guys. Kia, your presence in the pool that day was very reassuring for me. And I had no idea that you were new that way, that this was your first time. Kia Johnson, it was always reassuring to me to show up for work and you were there. As I recall, weren't you there on the 12th, the morning of the 12th, for the briefing? I seem to remember, but those days are just so fuzzy for me because they all went by in a blur. But I do remember post 9/11 seeing you in the briefing room at the White House, and we hugged that day. We hugged.
Because, there wasn't too much diversity in the briefing room. There wasn't that many women, much less women of color. And we, I remember that you and I would always, and April would talk to the sisters that would come in, the cleaning women at the White House, and that we had such a special relationship with them because they admired us for being, working in the capacity that we were, and we identified with them because, that's who we are. We all have people in our family, our parents or, our grandparents who were cleaning, the places where, my grandmother cleaned hotels in Philadelphia. So I identified with them. And for us to be that close to the president, maybe one generation or just there, but for the grace of God, we just had such a special relationship to the people who work there and, ended up getting some actually good information from people, who were the working people around the White House. And, just a great spirit amongst the minority, the sisters in the White House. And that special day, it held true as well. I remember hugging a lot of people in the days following, just reassuring that we were all okay and that we got through, and just the shock and disbelief of what happened to so many people who were just here just a few days before.
I tell you, the moment that broke me, I operated on adrenaline all through the 11th and the 12th. I mean, went back to work almost immediately. I think I was back at the White House by that 9:15 gaggle in the morning. I was at the White House all day on the 12th. And then the morning of the 13th, as I got up again to go back for another day of this adrenaline journalism, I watched the local news, and they showed the school pictures of 3 children from DC who were on the plane that crashed into the Pentagon.
Mhm.
And I looked at those innocent little faces and just froze. And there was one little boy, and I'll never forget that face. His sweet little face. His name was Bernard. I'll never forget that. I broke. That's when I broke, and the tears came. All the tears that I didn't get to try, didn't get to cry in the moment, and you need that release. You definitely need that release. But to look in the face of that child and know that he was gone in this act of just terror and senselessness broke me. When did you get your break? When did you finally stop the adrenaline rush and break?
I know you guys remember seeing those images of people in New York City plastering those photocopied faces along the subway, along walls. They were everywhere. Have you seen this face? This person, please call. Just people desperately looking for their loved ones that were just missing for days and days and days. And just hoping beyond hope that they were maybe unconscious somewhere in a hospital and couldn't identify themselves. Just those countless images of those literally hundreds and hundreds of faces stapled, to the walls in New York, that I was seeing these images coming in, that I just identified with that, just the not knowing if your loved one was, dead or alive. And just a very awful time. I think that really touched me, was that these people were so, they hadn't given up hope. And most of us knew that their loved one was no longer with us, but just their disbelief just hit me, that they would soon be just sandbagged with the tremendous grief that the rest of the country was going through. That really affected me, as well as those kids on that United flight that hit the Pentagon. And just the teachers, and just, they were so excited to go on this trip, just the senselessness of it, and I kind of always felt badly about the plane that was in Shanksville, that somehow that part of 9/11 did not somehow hold the same significance as the Pentagon and the Twin Towers, because it was, I just didn't. Oh, I don't know. Maybe that's just wrong. I think that was the plane that the people actually planned to interfere, to overtake the attackers.
Yes.
There were heroes in every single one of those planes. And, when we talk about 9/11, I think the Shanksville always comes in third after, of course, New York and the Pentagon. But they're all equal in my eyes. The end result was the same for all of them. Of course, the numbers were less, but it was just a devastating day that none of us will forget. And it was the beginning of the end of our freedoms in a lot of ways. Our security crackdown, the checkpoints, the concrete blocks that were put in front of everything, the checkpoints, just the intense scrutiny on. I guess it's the end of our innocence, the end of our, the end of our freedoms as we knew them up until that point.
I don't remember breaking. I'm sure I did, but in a lot of cases where there are traumatic events, children in particular tend to erase their memory. Now, I can't erase my memory. I know it happened. And I'm sure I broke down over time, but I can't seem to recall anything after that day. I don't remember even what I did the next day. I know I went to work, and I get asked this question many times, and I cannot recollect even the next day. But, I want to say this about Shanksville and United Flight 93. That was the only victory that day on September 11th, 2001. We had normal, average, everyday people who decided to take it upon themselves to fight back. And so they broke into the cockpit and fought till their deaths. And I remember vividly being travel pool with the same two gentlemen, both Black men, George Christian and Eric Washington. And I remember we stood on a mound of dirt as they had just broken ground to start building the memorial. And even then I was like, I remember that, but honestly, I don't remember what I did even the rest of that year. And that's profound. I mean, that is just something that I've been grappling with for, 20 years, or 19 years. But, that day, United Flight 93 and those passengers who fought back, they are heroes.
Thinking about it now, here we are 20 years down the road from that moment in time as journalists, and obviously committed to continuing to tell the story. How do you go about processing, I guess is the best word I can think of, this story 20 years later, a whole generation, a war, some serious losses and sacrifice, rabid diplomacy, ups and downs. And now 20 years down the road, as this anniversary creeps up on us, Afghanistan is in the place that it is in now. How do you process, as a journalist, as an American, what is happening now?
I wrestle with this because I know you guys remember after 9/11, it was the most patriotic time that I had ever felt in this country. People went out and bought American flags. We were unified. The political divide kind of was on the back burner because of, the crisis that was before us. And we all kind of became one for the first time that I could remember. Although it was brief, but it's difficult because, I remember people put little American flags on there. They were wearing little American flags and people were very patriotic, and it was regardless of race. It was across racial lines. And that was a beautiful moment, although, it was tragedy that we had to suffer to see that. I don't know what happened to that unity. It certainly has gone by the wayside. And I would like to see some of that unity return. And of course, without having to go through a tragedy.
I'm reminded of it every day, what happened. And every time somebody asks me, what's that tattoo about? Well, take one guess. It is a way for me. I know I'll never forget. I lived through it. But I don't want anybody else to forget. God forbid if they find my body somewhere, because this is going to be the one staple to identify me.
Now, show us this tattoo again. Is that Air Force One?
It is.
Wow.
It's a 747, and always wanted to get a plane tattoo. I don't have many tattoos, but I had to get this one, and I got it for the anniversary, the 1 year anniversary of 9/11. And obviously I get asked all the time, what's it about? And most people don't know my story. And then when I tell them, I feel like they don't believe me. And then I have to say, well, I hate to say this, but just Google me and read my story. Read every journalist story from that day. Mm-hmm. Read what we went through, because it occurred, and it occurred in real time.
Ladies, it's just been a complete pleasure to have this conversation with you. Thank you for taking yourselves off mute for us. And hopefully we can get to do this again really soon. Thank you, everybody, for joining us for this discussion. Please follow us on IG and on Twitter at Be Unmuted. Hit us up on our Facebook page. Definitely find us at blackwomenunmuted.com, where we take the sisters off mute one story at a time.